Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Frost & Sullivan's latest webinar. Today's event is titled 2019 Global Defense Outlook. My name is Anna, and I oversee Frost & Sullivan's Growth, Innovation, and Leadership briefings. Our presenter today is Scott Clark. Scott is our Vice President here at Frost & Sullivan of our Global Defense Program. Scott has over 30 years of military and industrial experience within the aerospace and defense sector. He has experience and knowledge within military concepts, capabilities, unmanned systems, radar, electronic warfare, and homeland security aerospace applications. With that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Scott.
Thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending where you are in the world listening. Today, I'm going to focus on 6 major points, and I understand this is a really big subject, and probably 30-40 minutes is not going to do it justice. So I will take any questions you may have or any follow-up questions you may have after the presentation by email or telephone, and I'm quite happy to go into more detail with you. Generally today, I'm going to cover 6 points. First of all, just to orientate everyone, I think everyone knows what's happening in the world today, but I'll focus on the geopolitical events which are key to defense going forward into 2019 and over the next 4 to 5 years. I will then focus on the regional top spenders. I'll go around the regions, 6 of them, and I will look at the top 3 spenders in each region and highlight some of the issues and programs which that they will be facing over the next couple of years. I also will focus on the defense segments. Now, in Frost & Sullivan, within the defense sector, we cover roughly 14 segments. Now, I clearly can't do all those segments today. I will focus on the platform segments, so the aircraft, the tanks, etc., and also on some of the interesting ones around training and simulation and services, which is something which is increasing in a lot of countries around the world. Next, I will cover the defense industry, the industrial base, and what does it mean for exporters, so the emphasis is on exporting rather than your own domestic markets. I will touch on digitalization within defense briefly. I know it's a subject which is starting to, as no clients come to us over the last 12 months around this particular subject and trying to get their heads around it. And also I'll touch on technology as well, just 5 technology groups which are probably going to shape the next 10 years in terms of solutions available in the market, in some cases probably disrupt the market. So on that note, I will move quickly into the big picture in terms of what's happening around the world today. This slide, at the heart of the slide, is a map looking at the influences from the global powers in terms of US, Russia, and China, and how that is really shifting. So if we go look at the traditional world order over the last 50, 60 years, you've had the US, which has been dominant in the blue shaded countries, mainly Europe, Middle East, Asia Pacific. You've had Russia post 1990s, basically falling back upon itself, and mainly its regional or near neighbours in terms of the Stans and the Caucasus. And then you have China rising and its growing influences around its immediate area, and also relationships with Pakistan, for example. But what we see is some new competitions appearing, which basically, as we've moved from the Cold War into a relative period of peace, now moving more towards a Cold War type era, you see these competitions coming to rise again. And you see, for example, the US-Russia competitions in South America, in India, so traditionally a Russian procurer of equipment, but over the last 5-10 years, the US have managed to gain an inroad into India. And also you look at, it's not a competition just between the US and Russia and US and China, also there's competition between Russia and China happening in various parts of the world as well. So if you look at some of the big events which are going to shape 2019, a lot of them are basically a continuation of what's happened over the last couple of years. So if I start with US trade and foreign policy, since President Trump's come on board, there's been a destabilizing effect in terms of the existing relationships the US has had with various allies, and particularly Europe, for example. If I mentioned, for example, NATO and the position he's made on NATO. Now, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but it has had an impact in terms of European countries and how they go forward in terms of defence matters. So, for example, Europe have basically formed an EU defence policy. They have funding through what's called EU PESCO, so Permanent Security Cooperation, and funded programs which are for European companies to work in collaboration, develop next generation of combat equipment, etc. So programs such as Euromail or Euro RPAS, for example, are all coming underneath this new umbrella or funding umbrella for collaboration. So what that means is that if you're a European company, great, but if you're a US company, for example, trying to move into Europe, you may find some challenges as Europe refocuses its spending to be more European orientated. Other issues which have been popular of late in terms of the intermediate range nuclear forces policy, the JCPOA in terms of Iran, the withdrawal from Syria, have all left uncertainty across the EU and elsewhere around the world in terms of foreign policy and where the US is going. Like I said, I'm not commenting on whether it's good or bad. It's just a situation which is going to have some ramification. If I now look at Brexit and the EU, so Brexit, it's coming to a head in terms end of March. UK will no longer be part of the EU. Now, if you ask me, is it going to be hard? Is it going to be soft? I couldn't tell you today. It's a situation which changes daily here in London, and even for myself who's sitting here, I can't follow where it's going to end. I would suspect it's going to be a hard Brexit, where effectively UK will crash out of the EU, and there will be uncertainty around a lot of aspects of UK spending going forward. If you look at EU, you've got a growing nationalism happening in EU. If you look at the recent elections in France, in Germany, you would have seen populist parties starting to gain traction in terms of winning votes and obviously popularity. Now, that's made a lot of the traditional parties to stand up and think about future policies, etc. So there's a growing nationalism in the EU which might have an impact in terms of future defence spending and how they procure different systems. If I look at North Korea, that will definitely have some sort of impact this year. Now, at the moment, we made positive grounds last year in terms of relationships with North Korea. Whether that will continue going forward will be seen over the next 12 months. China, in terms of influence within the South China Sea, it's a real issue which I know the US is party to, trying to destabilize. You've got Australia and Japan worried about the freedom of navigation through those waters. So it's an issue which I don't think is going to go away anytime soon, but tensions will rise, not necessarily going to lead to a conflict, but could potentially lead to a situation where basically not necessarily, maybe military force on a small scale may be seen. The Iran nuclear policy, it's a huge issue. This year, I would dare say that Iran will fall back to its pre-2015 state. It's left the EU somewhat in an embarrassing situation, as it was one of the key drivers behind the policy in the first place. Syria, it's going to be one of those continuations of a situation which over the last 5 or 6 years has seen US forces, European forces, etc. engaged. With the US withdrawing from Syria, it leaves a power vacuum. You'll see Russia and Iran having greater influence in Syria, and potentially that leaves other regional powers such as Turkey and Iran in somewhat of a vulnerable position. And the other one, which I probably want to talk about on this particular slide, is terrorism. I've seen statements that now that ISIS has been defeated in in Syria, that that it's the end. Unfortunately, the nature of those type of organisations means they just move elsewhere. Terrorism, ISIS, Boko Haram, are all going to be still a destabilizing influence in the strategic circumstances over the next 10-15 years. So if I just now move into a poll question. So what we would like to do is ask 3 poll questions just to get your views on certain aspects of this presentation. So the first poll question, which geographical regions do you see as delivering defence export growth over the next 10 years? And the emphasis is on the word export here rather than your own domestic countries. So I've grouped them into regions, so the Americas, North, Central and South, Asia, Europe, Middle East and Africa. So if I just give you a few minutes, basically a minute to think about and to respond to that particular question. Okay, we've got 2 answers there. No, one's come in. Okay, we'll stop the voting there. Asia Pacific region, India, etc. Certainly areas which I certainly see markets going forward into the future, and I'm just about to talk about that on this particular slide. So, if I go region by region and start with the European region up the top there, so the 3 biggest spenders you see in the marketplace, and by the way, they're not in order or anything like that. So if I look at UK, roughly they spend 44 to 45 billion US per year. Like I said on the previous slide, Brexit is really going to have an impact on the UK defence spending. The MOD has indicated that they're going to increase defence spending over the next 10 years. However, it's particularly in probably between now and early 2020s, as Brexit certainly unfolds in terms of the impact. The fluctuation of the pound, programs such as the F-35, anything which has a US supply chain is certainly going to be affected, will have an impact in terms of procurement in the UK. Also, if you look at UK current programs such as the carriers, the Queen Elizabeth class, the F-35, there's P-8 now, you've got the Apache AH-64 Echo upgrade. They're all programs which are running, which are chewing up the current budget. So real spend associated with future UK programs is probably not going to happen until 23, 24, 25 time period, as those programs start to wane in terms of chewing up the defence budgets. That's not to say there's not opportunities, it's just to say that those bigger programs are going to take priority. Also, some of those programs have the US supply chain, so they will fluctuate in terms of based on the exchange rate. But future programs such as the mechanized infantry vehicle, which has just been recently selected, though not signed, with Ramifications for the Boxer. Those programs are still yet to be signed and should happen sometime over the next 12-18 months. In terms of future programs in the C4ISR space, you have the Morpheus program, which is to replace the battlefield tactical communications, and then you have decisions yet to happen around the Type 31 frigate, which would happen in the early 2020s. So there's programs there which are yet to have an impact in terms of defence spend. If I look at Germany, Germany recently just boosted their defence spending by about 4 billion euros, that is, so it's around about 6-7 billion US, to roughly a 42 to 43 billion euro type mark. Now, Germany has a lot of catch up to do. Their defence spending in terms of procurement has, over the last 10-15 years, has been quite low, and they have a lot of modernisation to do, to replacing, from replacing the Tornado right through to land tactical communications, digitalisation of the land battle space, naval upgrades, helicopters. All these decisions are going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, which will give lots of opportunities for both US as well as European suppliers. If I look at France has been a steady, has had a steady budget of around about 45-50 billion for a long time. Its outlays are predominantly going to be driven by the likes of the Barracuda SSGN. It has Rafale upgrades going through to the latest F4 standard. It has the Tiger NH90 coming into service. There's new UAVs around Sergeant Patroller and the Euromail program. And an interesting thing is that obviously the Franco-German future fighter program, even though it's only a small spend now, will obviously have a big impact as we move towards the 2030s and 2040s. If I look at India, Pakistan and Ukraine, so what we call Central and South Asia, then India is by far the most attractive market. There's lots of programs going forward in India across air, land and sea. However, it's a market which is difficult to penetrate, and you have to be in there for the long term rather than for a short-term gain. Also, industrial policies in India have around make or buy will dictate that you form partnerships with Indian companies to actually enter the marketplace. Also, another interesting trend, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, is the fact that these countries now have strong requirements around technology transfer, which means that you have to be prepared to engage not in terms of just selling equipment, but also the technology and know-how associated with those equipment. But I'll touch on that in a minute. Pakistan, it's very difficult for Western companies because it's starting to align itself with China. Even though there's some defence spending, Pakistan's also very interested in the collaborative program, so it can build up its own defence industries. So Chinese have been engaged with Pakistani companies around the main battle tank, the MBT 2000, tailorized for Pakistan, and obviously the JF-17, just as a couple of examples. Ukraine, obviously with its border problems with Russia, in the Crimea, the Black Sea, as well as in the east, is basically trying to modernise its defence force at the same time as deal with the Russian threat, and hence there's opportunities in terms of providing equipment and, more importantly, assistance in terms of services to train Ukrainian forces. If we move now to the Asia Pacific region, Korea, Japan, Australia. Korea and Japan are by far the largest defence spenders. Both have increased the defence spending and plan to increase the defence spending over the next 5 years in terms of their 5-year plans. Mainly in the air and maritime environments, but obviously South Korea, because of its threat from the northern neighbour, also has a strong focus on land C4SR. Australia has gone through a huge modernisation program over the last 10 years, and that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. But some of the big ticket items, such as the air warfare destroyer, you have C-5000 now, which is the new frigates, the Type 26 based frigates. You have the C-1000 submarine program. You've had decisions around Land 400, which is the infantry fighting vehicle. And going forward into the future, you've got decisions around F-35 additional buy, another 28, which is going to happen very shortly in the next couple of years. So there's some real big ticket items which are happening in Australia at the moment. And by the way, even though those decisions have made, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of the supply chains with those bigger programs. If we look at the Middle East, Saudi Arabia has been the biggest buyer for a long time, particularly in terms of US as well as European sourced equipment. That is probably going to continue, though at a lesser extent than what has been done over in the past. Israel has the F-35 and a number of other upgrade programs going forward. Obviously, the US-Israeli relationship is strong, and the funding of programs by the US in terms of acquiring US equipment. Turkey is an interesting country in that it wants to develop its own defence industry, or is developing its own defence industry to be indigenous and also to become a regional power in terms of exports as well. It is modernising across the board in terms of air, land and sea. But at the same time, it's trying to deal with, an economy which is up and down, as well as the threat or operations it currently has in northern Syria. So even though it has aspirations, sometimes I think it's going to struggle in terms of funding. If I talk about Africa, then the three biggest spenders are Egypt, Algeria and Morocco. What's interesting about Africa is the diversification which is happening in terms of the source of equipment. So in the past, you would have had Egypt and Morocco, or particularly, Algeria, for example, sourced from Russia. They're now opening themselves up to supplies from Europe. Egypt's always been a mix of Russian and US equipment, but also, interesting enough, it's now acquiring systems from China. And Morocco is also now starting to diversify and look at alternative solutions to Western sourced equipment. If I just think about the programs, Egypt is really going through. I don't think Egypt has the capacity at the moment to really take on any more in terms of procurement. You've got Rafale, you've got MiG-29 procurement on the air side, you've got AH-64s being delivered. You're on the naval side, you've got the corvettes as well as frigates being procured. So they've got a lot of big ticket items on a relatively small defence budget. Algeria has predominantly been modernised its air and naval. It's now starting to modernise its land forces, and like I said, is looking at diversifying its source of equipment, though still heavily aligned to Russia. And Morocco, going forward into the future, is looking at potentially a new fighter to replace the F-16 F-5s in the early 2020 time period, probably around 25. Also is looking at upgrading its anti-submarine warfare capability in terms of submarine as well as corvettes or a frigate class ship, because it sees its main threat as being Algeria. If I go to South America, the South American market is relatively flat, and I think it's still going to remain relatively flat for another 5 years. The biggest economy is Brazil. its procurement programs have been put on hold due to the state of the economy, and they will slowly, as the economy slowly rebuilds, so will the defence programs be reinitiated, particularly around the naval forces in terms of frigates, corvettes, OPVs, and submarines. If I look at North America, obviously the US is the biggest defence market in the world, and there's a number of programs which are well published, so I won't go into the US into any detail. In terms of Canada, they made decisions around the Canadian Surface Combatant Type 26 class. So, a big theme is the Type 26 multi-mission frigate is certainly a growing trend in Western navies, and has done well. And the BAE Systems has done well over the last 12 months in terms of securing those two big programs. Canada has to make some big decisions over the next 10 years around its equipment. You got the Canadian fighter program replacing the F-18s. You have the P3, which has gone through a midlife upgrade, but will still probably have to replace towards the 2030 time period. You've got decisions around the Griffin, the Bell 214s. So you've got decisions around some of the land force elements as well. So Canada has to replace a lot of these equipment, but the budgets at the moment aren't going to sustain that level of procurement. And Mexico is just trundling along. So in terms of the markets, Asia Pacific, certainly there's a huge market in Asia Pacific if you incorporate India as well as South Korea, Japan, and Australia. But also you've got Singapore making decisions around future fighter, which looks like being F-35, with a decision sometime this year. And some of the other some of the other Asian economies like Malaysia, Thailand, etc., have some naval and air platforms which need to be replaced over the next 10-year period. Like I said at the beginning, we cover 14 segments within the defence sector. And just looking at time, I will just cover the top 5 platforms very quickly, talking about the trends we see today, and then also probably touch on training simulation and defence services. Like I said, if you have questions regarding the other segments on the slide, please just send me an email. So if I look at combat and mission aircraft, the fighter competitions around the world are numerous, with a lot of nations looking at the decision of going from a 4th generation to a 5th generation platform over the next 10 years. The decisions around Finland, Switzerland, for example, which have gone through an RFI or RFQ type process, and some sort of decision is going to be either this year or over the next 2 years, which will start to impact the marketplace. The issues I think a lot of countries are trying to grapple with is the issue of going from a 4th generation to a 5th generation fighter. And obviously the 5th generation fighter on the market today is the F-35. And for European operators, which we've seen, such as Belgium, UK, Netherlands, Norway, which have operated F-16, not the UK, but the other ones, the decision to go to F-35 was probably a natural one. Some of the other competitions around the world, it's probably a little bit more difficult to judge, and so there's still a role for a 4th generation platform, such as the Eurofighter, the Rafale, the Saab, Gripen, new generation EF, just to name a couple. So those type of programs, I think, will still give opportunities for the existing manufacturers. If you look at new developments in the fighter or combat aircraft market, you got the Turkish TFX program, which has been going on for a while, involving BAE Systems and TAI, Turkish Aerospace Industries. You had the KFX program. Both of those programs are probably aiming for about a mid-20 before you see those type of platforms, one, into the domestic markets, but then be a threat or competition in the future for that fifth generation type competition. Programs such as the Franco-German Future Combat Air System, like I said, involves France and Germany to replace the Rafale and the Typhoon in the 2040 time period. You've just seen recently Spain join, and I wouldn't be surprised if Italy also joins that particular development going forward. The United Kingdom has indicated last year that they're going to invest in the Tempest, and they're seeking international partners for that particular program. And the two likely candidates which stand out are Japan and India, but there could be others as well. I can't see how Tempest is going to go forward, given the current budget situation and also Brexit. It will probably go on in terms of early development studies, but full-blown developmental activities is probably some years off. And then also you've got competition coming in from China, with the likes of the J-20, J-31, which will again, in some of those countries around South America, some countries around Asia, as well as Africa, they could be contending combat aircraft. On the mission aircraft side of the house, what we see is effectively adoption of commercial platforms, general aviation platforms, business aircraft, which have been adapted, give you lower operating costs, and of course the size, weight, and power of mission systems and sensors is coming down, enables you to put them onto those smaller platform types. And you can see that across airborne early warning, air-to-ground surveillance, SIGINT, and maritime patrol. The latter, the MPA, some 500 aircraft which need to be replaced over the next 10 to 15 years, and 500 aircraft, and about 50% of those will need to be replaced or upgraded over the next 10 to 15 years. And the same on the maritime surveillance aircraft side, so the smaller platforms for coastal surveillance, EEZ type operations, there's roughly 400 which will need to be replaced. So that maritime surveillance, maritime patrol market is certainly an area where there's lots of opportunities going forward into the future. Just quickly touching on naval systems. What we are seeing is the trends around multi-mission warships, greater autonomy, so the adoption of USVs, so unmanned surface vessels, and AUVs, autonomous underwater vessels, are starting to become an extension to combat systems and to ship operations. And typical concepts around mine warfare, anti-submarine warfare, going forward into the future will use these type of systems. Also, the adoption of UAS, so unmanned air systems, particularly VTOL-based solutions, whether they be small, the Schiebel S-100 type, or the Fire Scout type solutions, will also start to be mandatory additions to combat systems on board ships of various classes. If we look at submarines, there's certainly a growth in submarines. The C-1000 project, for example, where effectively Australia is doubling its submarine force from 6 to 12, now is an indication that they see submarines as still a viable combat asset going forward into the future, particularly in Asia Pacific, where you've got shallow waters operations, and diesel platforms are the trend. If we look at land combat vehicles, then basically the land systems up until probably the last 10-15 years have been long neglected, poor cousins to the air and naval side of the house. We do see that there's a renewal of land programs now driven by things like obsolescence and the fact that a lot of these platforms are now 40-50 years old. You have new expeditionary missions which require new types of vehicles. You have threats from improvised explosive devices, penetrating munitions requiring new designs, and not least is the adoption of unmanned ground vehicles as an extension to some of these more traditional vehicle types. So there's a lot of technology and a lot of opportunities as we go through these renewal programs around the world. It also is generating new competition as we see 40, 50, if not even 60 different vehicles in any one particular class, and both being designed for domestic use as well as in the export market. If you look at trends around main battle tank, most the main battle tanks are looking at a 2035 time period when they're going to leave service or need to be replaced. That's the likes of the Leopards, the Challengers, the Abrams, which will require new designs, which the design work will probably start around about now to hit that 2035 time period. If I move on to unmanned systems, basically the trend is towards unmanned. UAS, you'll see a couple of trends. First of all, you see new mail type programs, like I said, in Europe around the Euro RPAS. You'll see a greater number of smaller swarm type concepts starting to appear, and obviously that manned unmanned teaming between aircraft, helicopters, and unmanned adjuncts to their capabilities. On the ground side, at the moment, there's around about 100 UGV type designs, and each year that is growing. On the USV, there's about 50 different designs at the moment, and really a lot of navies are in the concept demonstration phase, and they will eventually lead to procurement programs in the 2025 time period. And finally, the AUVs. There's about 60 bespoke solutions today, focusing on a single mission. As the naval requirements start to consolidate, the concepts start to formulate, they will start to basically the number of competitors in the marketplace will start to shrink, and new designs, which will be more robust, will start to appear. One of the markets which I think is going to grow considerably is air defense systems. There's a lot of new threats in terms of ballistic, cruise missile, but more importantly, as you would have seen over the last 6 months, news reports around Russia and China developing hypersonic missiles in terms of air-to-ground. What that means is that a lot of air defense systems are now either redundant or certainly less effective than what they were in the past. So therefore, a lot of the air defense systems will have to be integrated in terms of sensor networks, C4 in terms of the processing, as well as the response elements in terms of missile systems. Another key trend in the air defense system is the low radar cross-section combat aircraft, as well as the threats from unmanned air systems in the battle space. Over the last 15 years, where Western forces have used UAS in a relatively benign space, in the future you'll see future state-on-state or even terrorist groups, etc., starting to use UAS in a threatening environment. One of the key trends across all the three platform segments is this cooperation. So what we see from an industry perspective is greater cooperation in terms of both research and development as well as procurement, mainly because the cost associated with developing these new generation of systems is too prohibitive for a single country to go alone. So cooperation, collaboration, whatever term you want to use, is certainly the way in terms of future trends on an industrial as well as a government basis. Of course, at time I will move forward. Like I said, if you have questions on the other segments, please just send me an email, and I'm quite happy to respond. Just to quickly touch on the global defence industrial and technology base. So what do we see happening going forward into the future? So first of all, there's growing competition, and the competition is coming from the likes of China, who are now starting to penetrate, to be honest, a lot of Russian markets in places like Africa, etc., with low-cost solutions. But also the technology and capabilities of Chinese industries certainly increased to be comparative in terms of performance to some of the Western technologies. We also see countries like Turkey, South Korea, Japan, all adopting export strategies to penetrate initially their regional markets, but more or increasingly global markets. And also some countries like Australia, you would have seen recently just set up a defence export office to actually facilitate greater exports from that country. So there's going to be increased competition from these new players in the marketplace. Also, the industrial policies are now changing. So I indicated earlier, for example, India with its DPP 2016 policy, Make Buy India policy, which is forcing collaboration in terms of partnerships, technology transfer, which is really building up the capability of domestic industries to support initially their own capabilities, but also in the future to export. So greater competition is certainly one thing we're seeing as going to impact the global defence industrial technology base over the next 5 years. The collaboration I've already mentioned, so next generation combat systems because of cost. Mergers and acquisitions. So we've seen some real big mergers happening in the US. In Europe, in the naval side, you've seen Fincantieri and STX of France, and potentially in the future Naval Group and Fincantieri of Italy merging. You've seen potentially Rheinmetall acquiring KMW or plan to acquire KMW, which is obviously in a joint venture with Nexter of France in terms of KNDS. Where we see future consolidation happening or mergers and acquisition happening is in Europe, where you see a lot of duplication of capability. And these European programs, which I mentioned very early on in the presentation, are going to facilitate those type of mergers going forward. What we also see is, particularly in the US, for example, is the adoption of or the big OEMs, etc., acquiring service-orientated businesses or IT businesses. And for example, General Dynamics with the acquisition of CSRA last year is just an example of that. And finally, is that we see Western nations, particularly the US, UK, Australia, Canada, initially France, Germany, and some of the European countries in the second wave, outsourcing a lot more and more of their non-combat related activities, which will lead to new competitors entering the marketplace, which are non-traditional defence players, and particularly in the IT sector, for example. So what we see is, as a summary, is just greater competition across the global defence market. Okay, just going into poll question number 2. So what do you believe is the greatest challenge in winning defence export opportunities? And I've put 5 particular options there. One is the need for a government framework. So what this means is, I'm not talking about FMS. What I'm talking about is some sort of government framework which facilitates not just the sale of equipment, but also the research and development, the tech transfer, transfer of knowledge, etc., as well as the sale of equipment, and potentially in collaboration of the development and potential sale of that equipment as a joint product. So government frameworks. The other one is increasing price pressures from new arrivals, so I touched on those just briefly. Tech transfer, which is always a touchy subject, I know, in terms of transferring your knowledge and know-how and skill capability. Market intelligence, or the last one is all of the above. Okay, about 15 seconds, and then we'll move on. Okay, yeah, tech transfer, I'm not surprised. Just some recent studies we've done with some clients. Government framework certainly came up quite often as an issue. and also the increasing competition they see from new players. But tech transfer is certainly one which I've experienced in the past. Just moving on now to the next slide. So just briefly touching on the technology groups. Artificial intelligence, computational technologies. So this is things like big data, obviously artificial intelligence associated with autonomy, swarm technologies, etc., are certainly going to have an impact. They're already having an impact in the marketplace and will continue to do so. If I look at battle space networks and cyber-related technologies, so this is the adoption of things like MANA, which I know is an existing technology, but the complexity of MANA networks will increase in terms of the number of nodes. You have potential 5G technology, which will obviously need to be militarized to be introduced over the next, particularly from the 2020s onwards. And then you obviously got cyber-related technologies around blockchain, which, from a security perspective, network security perspective, all these are around about one, connectivity, two, increasing the throughput in terms of having the bandwidth to support the high data rates, etc., required in terms of the future weapon systems, etc., as well as providing the cybersecurity in terms of new threats. So battlespace networks and cyber-related technologies are already here today, but are going to evolve in terms of more complexity. The future weapon systems, so we touched a little bit on hypersonic. So Russia has already tested last year the missile. China has one which is in a prototype and demonstration phase, and the US is probably still 3 to 5 years away before it will have a prototype / a operational system. So hypersonic missiles will fundamentally change, like I said, a lot of concepts and thinking around air defense and future naval combatants, etc. Other weapon systems such as directed energy weapons, railguns will continue to evolve through the research and development side, and probably still 5 to 10 years away before they'll become mature type capabilities, albeit in probably limited fashion. Other two technologies which are having an impact or will have an impact is around future energy and power systems. Small modular reactor technology on the civil side, potentially being used in the military sense, providing obviously on surface and submarine combatants, as well as in the future in terms of having deployable power systems to support in-theatre operations, etc. Fuel cells, in terms of being technologies, is progressing quickly on the basis of unmanned systems, and there's still technology being evolved around solar panels, etc., to give an alternative to having diesel-based solutions, generators, etc., in the battle space. And the last one, which we've all been watching for a while, is the adoption of augmented reality, virtual reality type technologies, and the applications across all defence segments, whether they be in the cockpit, in terms of presenting information to the soldier, through to training and simulation. So we follow up to about 8 groups of technologies, and all of them are going to have some sort of impact as we go forward into the future in terms of disrupting the marketplace. For example, the future weapon systems technologies around hypersonic missiles, or they will provide enhanced capabilities around in terms of artificial intelligence and the battlespace networks. Okay, poll question number 3. Sorry, I'm rushing this a little bit because we're running out of time. In terms of the last poll question, it's really looking at those 5 technology groups. Which do you see as being having the greatest impact over the next 10 years? So that's from computation, artificial intelligence, through to HMI technologies, as I just went through. Okay, 15 seconds, and then I'll move on. Okay. just touching on digitalization, it's one of those subjects which I think has been, the terminology which has been misused. Defence has always, over the last 20, 30 years, has been slowly digitalizing the battle space in terms of equipment, connectivity, in terms of networking, in terms of adoption of computing technology, etc., etc. What we're talking about here in terms of digitalization is really the defense enterprise. So it's not just the battle space, battlefield of things. It's really talking about the back office related stuff, the procurement process, but more importantly, the interaction between defense and defense industry going forward into the future. Now, digitalization in defense is always going to have challenges. As you see in the commercial sectors, they're adopting digital technology, business models, etc., which is fundamentally changing the nature of their business, providing cost savings, etc. In defense is a little bit more difficult, and the adoption is a lot slower than in some of these other sectors, mainly because of institutional barriers which we put in place in terms of distributing data between and the connectivity between defense agencies, etc. All for very good reasons. But that's also hampering the adoption of digital technologies and the business models associated with it. In terms of the competitive landscape, what we are seeing though in terms of these digitalization strategies within defense is the classic commercial operators, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, all the big IT players, which are coming to defense with different business models and approaches and attitudes towards how to implement digital solutions. And you can see that in some of the partnerships between classic OEMs and these new players like General Dynamics and Google, Microsoft in 2017, 2018, respectively, Leidos with AWS in 2018, and then with Microsoft, you got Thales and Microsoft in 2018, forming these strategic partnerships and alliances to take or to implement their digital platforms and digital solutions in the defense environment. Also, new business models. Now, I see a lot of the digitalization progressing along with the services market. So as defense forces culturally become more open to transferring in-house activities to contractors, building up the defense services business, then these digital models, business models, etc., will have more of a play. And providing information as a service, just an example, could be a particular business which would support some of the intelligence functions, etc. And the US is by far more advanced in its thinking than some of the other Western as well as other forces around the world. And the question I leave you with is around data modernization. So what you see in the commercial sector is data has become a commodity, and how can that be applied in the defense environment? Okay, key takeaways. So I covered a lot of ground at a high level and not in a lot of detail. Like I said, please contact me afterwards if you want some more information. But I hope that you go away with understanding that the geographical instability, the conflict between, or not conflict, the power struggles between US, China and Russia will have an impact on defense spending around the world. And generally you see across most of the regions an increase in defense spending. And also the modernization. So a lot of the defense forces have suffered in terms of the last, particularly the last 10, 15 years, as the economies declined or have suffered, so is defense spending. So now they're going for a regeneration, a remodernization of a lot of the defense capabilities. In terms of key regions, Europe, Asia Pacific, India and Middle East are my recommendations to you. Digitalization of defense will open up new concepts, new spending priorities. It will also open up new business models and new opportunities for companies like yourselves to engage and grow your business. And basically, the traditional defence exporters will come under increasing pressure from these emerging players in the marketplace, and also these non-traditional defence companies, like I mentioned before. On that note, I know we're running pretty short of time. Are there any questions?
Yes, Scott, we can answer one question here. We have a few minutes here. The one question here that we have time for, do you think that we'll see more military investments in maritime robotics, unmanned underwater vehicles, autonomous underwater vehicles, etc.? And what are the biggest investments being made today?
Okay, the answer is yes, in a big way. So the navies have been slow to come to the party in terms of autonomous systems. Particularly, we've probably seen over the last 5 years a real focus on adoption of UAS in the naval environment, so the VTOL UAS. But we also now see a lot more research and development going into concepts around using USVs and AUVs to support things like mine warfare, which is mine countermeasures, and anti-submarine warfare. I see it as a huge market going forward. The problem with today is that the navies are still very much in a conceptual stage, so the real money is not there yet. But definitely over the next 10 years, I see money both in terms of research and development, as well as procurement and integration of those systems on through ship modernization programs, but also as part of these new builds, such as the Type 26, Type 31, the Canadian CSC, the C5000 programs. So I see it as a real opportunity for companies in that particular space.
Thank you, Scott. Now, this concludes today's session. Again, as Scott mentioned, please contact us with any questions. I have posted the contact details on your screen at this time. We want to thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.